As a 17-year-old, there were four things that really matter to me in life. And they were golf, and girls. Those four things is like, that's all I could ever focus on. And I remember as a 17-year-old, I was on the golf course because that's what mattered to me in life. And I was at my home course, which was Forest Creek in Round Rock. And it was a Friday afternoon, and I was hanging out on the putting green. I was working on my putting and trying to, get some muscle memory in and that whole thing. And then as I'm on the putting green, I look out of the corner of my eye, and I see my girlfriend at the time. And I thought to myself, what is she doing here? Like, it was a complete surprise. It was a shock. And I was like, she's driving up in this golf cart. And then right behind my girlfriend, I see my parents walk around the corner. And I went, uh-oh, like something's up, something's not good. I don't know what happened. And I started to get nervous. But then I looked at her face, and I looked at my parents' face, and they were smiling. So I thought to myself, well, something good is about to happen. And so I'm on the putting green, I'm just putting away, and I'm kind of watching this, all develop. And then my girlfriend pulls up to the edge of the putting green, and I see some movement in the back of the golf cart where your, bags are. And there was somebody hiding there. And all of a sudden, this person stood up, and when they stood up, I began to freak out a little bit because right there was the 1992 U.S. Open champion, Tom Kite. And today you may hear Tom Kite and you're like, who? But back then in 1992, I'm telling you, he had just won the U.S. Open. He was the first professional golfer to win $9 million in earnings. He had won 19 PGA events. Like, it was Tom Kite. And I'm looking at him going, are you kidding me? And he comes up and he walks up to me on the putting green, and I'm like, I get to shake his hand, and I'm all nervous, And he begins to help me on the putting green. And he begins to say, hey, Buck, here's a couple things you could do. And I'm thinking to myself, this is the U.S. Open champ. And so we're talking, and then all of a sudden he looks at me and he says, hey, you want to go play a few holes? And I'm like, am I breathing? Yes, I would love to do that. And so Tom and I get in the golf cart. We go the first hole. And I remember I get up, and I'm the first one to tee off, and I'm getting ready, and I'm so nervous, and I'm thinking, there's the U.S. Open champion. I could feel my heart beating through my chest. And I tee off, and we play several holes, and Tom beats me by one stroke. And I felt, man, that was pretty good, right? And so I remember we finish up the round, we're talking about life and just talking about, his experiences at the U.S. Open. And we get to the back of his car, and he's loading up his clubs, and I look at Tom. And I said, Tom, I really want to be a professional golfer. I desire and I dream about that, and I've been working hard. And I just said, if you could give me, as a 17-year-old, one piece of advice, what would you say? And Tom looks at me and he says, the one piece of advice I would give you is you've got to outwork your competition. You've got to work harder than you've ever imagined. And when your buddies are like saying, hey, Buck, let's go hang out, and we've got these friends and this house and that, you got to stay on the golf course. You got to stay on the putting green. You got to stay on the driving range. You've got to outwork everybody. And if you do, perhaps you can make it on tour. That was great advice. Now, I didn't take his advice. I thought, good idea. I'm not going to do that. I want to have fun with my friends. But it was an amazing moment. It was one of those moments I'll never forget in my life. It was a defining moment. And the reason I share that story with you guys is because that's what we're talking about. In fact, today we're in part 2 of this series called Moments, where we're talking about defining moments. And last week, as we kicked this whole series off, we said, when it comes to a defining moment is a short experience that is both memorable and meaningful. These are those moments in life that you just wish, man, if this could last forever, it would be awesome. This is that moment you met her or that you met him. This is that moment for the first time you ran on the football field and there were the crowds and you felt that feeling. This was the moment that you made that last minute basketball shot. This is the moment that you looked into your newborn son's face or your newborn daughter's face. Those moments in life that just kind of pause. Those moments in life that just kind of sink in to who we are. See, the defining moments are really what shape our lives. Defining moments, that's what shapes our stories. That's the stories we tell. Defining moments is honestly the thing that shapes our legacies when we look back over the years and go, oh, let me think about my life. Our life is full of these defining moments. And last week as we began this discussion, we also said something else. We said defining moments are made up of these 4 things. They're made up of elevation. And elevation are those moments that rise above the rest. You've had 100 conversations with a friend, but it's that one conversation that you remember. Defining moments are made up of moments of insight. This is because you read that book, and after you've got that insight, or all of a sudden you just never thought of it that way, and it just changed the course of your life. That's a defining moment. A defining moment is those moments of pride where you worked so incredibly hard, you put so much energy, and you won the award, you got the trophy, you got the promotion. That's a defining moment. And a defining moment are those moments of connection to where you're experiencing these really cool moments. But the reason why it became a defining moment is because of him, because of her, because of them, because of the people around you. Those are the four things that really create defining moments in every single one of our lives. And today what I want to do is I want to talk about one of these. I want to talk about moments of elevation. And moments of elevation, just for a working definition for today's discussion, are these are the experiences that rise above the everyday. These are the peaks of life. These are kind of the mountaintop experiences of life. These are those moments that you're like, the time that you kissed a girl for the first time, the time that you kissed a boy for the first time, and it's like, whoa, that moment. This is the moment you stood before all your friends and family and looked her in the eyes and said, for the rest of my life, I am committed to you. These are those moments that you jump out of a perfectly good airplane. Why would you do that, right? But you would take that kind of spontaneous thing and it's like, oh my gosh, you'll remember that for the rest of your life. These moments of elevation, because these moments of elevation are the things that create defining moments, and defining moments are the things that shape our lives. So the question I want us to ask as we think about these moments of elevation, these peaks in our life, is this: can we create more moments of elevation? Is it possible in your life to create more moments, like to make the peaks even peakier, to make the mountaintop experiences even better? Is it possible to create moments of elevation in your marriage? Perhaps your marriage has just gotten in this routine. Can you breathe some life back into it? Is that possible? Can you create these moments of elevation with your parents, with your friends, with your boyfriend or girlfriend, with your finances, or maybe even with God when it comes to your Heavenly Father, and to go, man, it just feels like I'm experiencing more peaks than I've ever experienced with my relationship with God? Is that possible? And the answer is absolutely, it's possible. But if you and I are going to create more moments of elevation in our life, then we've got to pay attention to three words. And the three words are, we're going to have to break the script. For you and I, we're going to have to break the script. And what I mean by that is breaking the script is defying people's expectations of how an experience will unfold. Here's what I expected the experience to be, but wow, you defied my expectation. What I experienced there, what I saw there, man, that created a moment of elevation. That's a moment I'm going to remember forever. Now, what's a little bit tricky about moments of elevation are these don't come naturally. I mean, these have got to be thoughtful. You've got to have energy. You've got to have, intentionality, because oftentimes they feel like a surprise. Here was my expectation. I was surprised by what I experienced. It defied my expectation. But it's not a surprise. It's a strategic surprise. It's a delightful surprise. It's an intentional surprise, which means there is work behind it. There's intentionality behind creating these moments of elevation. For example, think about it this way. I remember when my son Luke, who's currently 15, when he was 4 years old, it was, we were approaching his birthday, and we talked to Luke, and Jill and I said, hey, Luke, where do you want to go for your birthday? And Luke said, Mom, Dad, I want to go to Hardin Corona. And we were like, really? You want to? And he's like, yeah, I love the salsa. And he was big it's crazy. He's always been into chips and salsa. And he's like, I want to go there. I love it, Mom and Dad. And we were like, okay, we're going to go. And so we go to Hardin Corona on his birthday, and all expectations were met. They set us, and it was great. We're eating fajitas. He's loving the chips and hot sauce. We're having a great time. And towards the end of the meal, Luke looks up, and he sees this pepper on the wall, and it has the words Bud Light across it. And then he begins to say, Mom, Dad, that's so cool. I love the color and I love the shape, and man, that's amazing. And he begins to talk, and we're like, Luke, I mean, it's awesome, but Bud Light, you're 4, can we talk? And so we have this discussion, and all of a sudden, the waiter comes up. And the waiter overheard this discussion. The waiter brings a chair, gets on the chair, reaches up, takes the pepper off, and says to my 4-year-old son, happy birthday, Luke. Here you go. And he gave him this pepper. I'm telling you, when you looked at Luke's face, you were like, oh my gosh. He was so excited. He's like, ah. And guess what he ended up doing? He hung it in his room. And now That was attention. A pastor, my 4-year-old son has a Bud Light sign in his room. I'm like, how's that going to work out? Anyways, but here's the deal. This is how powerful they are. If you talk to Luke today as a 15-year-old and you say, hey, Luke, your birthday's coming up. Where do you want to go? Every single time. I want to go to Hardin, Corona. Why? Because that's the power. That's the significance of breaking the script. That's the significance of those moments of elevation that kind of sink in to our memories. And guys, that works in restaurants and experiences there. That also works in the corporate world, in the business world. You guys have heard of Southwest Airlines? A great company. There's a lot of airlines. One of the things that all the airline companies do is that when you get on the airplane, you sit down, they, have their safety announcements, and to me, it sounds like this, blah, 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 oxygen, blah, 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 exit. I mean, you hear these, and it's just kind of like these mundane things. Well, Southwest did something brilliant. They said, well, what if we met expectations, flight on time, got people on seats and all this stuff, but what if we broke the script there? What if we decided to do something different and intentional? So they got in a room, they thought about this, and here's how it sounds on Southwest. This is literally some of their scripts that they'll use. They say things like this during that safety announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, if you wish to smoke, the smoking section on this plane is on the wing, and if you can light them, you can smoke them. There you go. And people hear that on the plane, and you hear these little chuckles, and it's like, oh, that was cute, or that was different. Or how about this one? This is one of my favorites. They say this: put the oxygen mask on yourself first, then on your child. If you're traveling with more than one child, start with the one who has more potential, or who is less likely to put you in a home. Go with that one, I'm telling you, we laugh, and people laugh on the plane because of the power of breaking the script. Now, here's what's so interesting, and we've got to at least consider this, is that the Southwest Airlines actually went on and did a study to go like, hey, is that making a difference? Is it adding to our bottom line? And after they quantified actually what the result of this activity is, they quantified it saying this is brought in extra $100 million to their bottom line. Because people kept coming back because they created a defining moment. Now, guys, here's why I'm telling you all this. See, these ideas of breaking the script, creating these moments of elevation, it works in the restaurant world, it works in the business and corporate world, and it also works in your life. It'll work in your marriage. It'll work with your son or daughter. It'll work with your friends, your mom, your dad. It'll work at work. It'll work with your habits and your choices, and it'll work with your finances, and it'll work with your relationship with God. But as I alluded to, this is hard. It's difficult because at the end of the day, it's no one's job to break the script. I mean, in a relationship, you don't sign up and that, it's her role to break the script. It's that doesn't happen. It's just this idea to go, somebody should do it. But then life gets busy and, you got taxes to pay and kids to feed and schoolwork to do and, job to go to. And life gets busy, and before long, because you haven't broken the script, you've just kind of done mundane things of life and gone through life and relationships in life, you feel stuck. You feel like, is this all there is? You feel like, is this really my relationship with my kids? Is this really my marriage? Is this really what work is all about? Is this really what you're all about, God? And when we feel stuck and we feel like life becomes a little bit irrelevant or the monotony of life kind of settles in, it's time for us to break the script. So what does that even look like? How do we begin to do that? And why is there this tension there? Why don't we just do it? Well, I want to talk about that today. And I want us to discuss this. And the way I want to kind of start this discussion is I want to think about the greatest person in human history who broke the script more than any other person. And that person's name is Jesus Christ. Because everywhere Jesus went, just think about his life just for a second. Even if you're not a follower of Christ, just think about what you know about Jesus. Everywhere he went, he broke the script. Pretty much everything he said broke the script. Everything he did broke the script. Over and over. It's amazing. For example, think about this. Jesus Christ comes into this world full of scripts, and one day he happens to be at this well, this water well. And his disciples are with him, and his disciples say, Jesus, hey, we're going to go in town, we're going to buy some food. Jesus says, fine, so be it. And so Jesus kind of sits on the edge, and he's hanging out, and he sees this water well, then he sees this woman walk up to the well, and she's a Samaritan. Now, here's the first century script when it comes to a Samaritan woman. That don't associate with Samaritans, especially women. And I don't have time to explain all the context and history of this, but just know for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years up until this point, Samaritans and Jews, they did not get along. You would never associate, if you're a good Jewish person, you would never touch or associate or engage or talk to a Samaritan, especially a woman in the first century. And here's this woman at the well. She's got 5 husbands, and the man she's living with is not even her husband. And the script is, don't even talk to her. What does Jesus do? Here's what he does. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, he engages her, will you give me a drink? The Samaritan woman said to him, you're a Jew and I'm a Samaritan woman. This is the script. Jesus, don't you know the script? How can you ask me for a drink? For Jews don't associate with Samaritans. And Jesus says, hey, I get what you're talking about, but I've come to do something different. I've come to break the script. He engages her. He invites her into a relationship. He invites her to drink living water. And Jesus broke the script, valued, loved, and engaged the Samaritan woman. We hear that today and we're like, yeah, but I'm just telling you, in the first century, this would have been unheard of. It would have been so polarizing that Jesus broke the script and it changed her life and the lives of the people in the town she lived. Jesus did this all the time. And then I think about the moment that Jesus walked across a bridge, and there was a bridge, and anytime you walked across the bridge in the first century, you expected to see a tax collector. And that's exactly what happened in this story. One time, Jesus went on from there. He saw a man named Matthew sitting at a tax collector's booth. So Jesus walks across the bridge. He sees Matthew, tax collector booth. That would be very normal in the first century. And the script in the first century when it came to tax collectors was this: avoid unclean tax collectors at all cost. Because if you begin to engage a tax collector in the first century, you would be considered unclean. Tax collectors were the worst of the worst of the worst. We hear that today. We're like, that makes no sense. But in the first century, especially the religious context, you could be a thief, you could be a liar, you could be all kinds of other things. But at least you weren't a tax collector. Because if you associated, you ate with, you hung out with a tax collector, you would be unclean, which meant you had to go to the temple. You had to yell out loud to everybody around you in the most humiliating ways, unclean, 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 because I spent time engaged and ate with a tax collector. That was the script. What did Jesus do? Jesus walks up to this tax collector and does the unthinkable. Matthew, follow me. Just take a step, hang out with me, he told him. And Matthew got up and followed him. While Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with him and his disciples. I'm just telling you, this was so radical. In the first century, to eat with somebody was to affirm them, to say, you have value, you have worth, you are significant. And here Jesus is in a room full of these tax collectors, full of these sinners who'd been excommunicated, kicked out of the temple, the religious system of the day, but he was entirely comfortable with them. He broke the script and he invited a tax collector to follow him. Matthew never forgot that moment because it was a defining moment and it changed his life. And then one day, Jesus, early in the morning as the sun was still rising, walked into the temple where he often would go, and he began to teach. And as he's teaching, the crowd's building around Jesus, and they're going, man, I've just never heard things like this, Jesus. And all of a sudden, this begins to happen. As he was speaking in the temple, early in the morning, the teachers of the religious law and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in the act of adultery. They put her in front of the crowd. Teacher, they said to Jesus, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. Here's the script. The law of Moses says to stone her. We all know the script, Jesus. We all know what needs to be done. What do you say? What do you say? The script in the first century was condemn her. Jesus understood this. And Jesus understood the law of Moses. He understood the law of Moses was for a very specific group of people called Israelites and for a very specific nation called the nation of Israel. But Jesus said the law came through Moses, but something brand new is on the scene through me for the whole world. It's called grace and truth. What did Jesus do? Well, Jesus said to this woman, then I certainly don't condemn you either. Go. And from now on, be free from a life of sin. Sin is just complicating your life. It may be fun in the moment, but man, it's making life so much more complex than it needs to be. Jesus broke the script and said, I don't condemn you. And guys, I could just show you story after story. His whole life was defined by breaking the script. But one of the greatest moment, I think the greatest script he ever broke was this one. And this one you're familiar with as well, is that dead people stay dead. I mean, when somebody dies, we all go, yeah, the script is dead people stay dead. Jesus was crucified on a Roman cross. If you study the history of crucifixions, you know it began with the Greeks, and you know the Romans took it and perfected the art and built in multiple redundancy systems to where everyone crucified on a Roman cross died. Jesus died. Game over. Because dead people stay dead. But 3 days later, he broke the script. Because 3 days later, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." After he said this, he showed them his hands and the side. The disciples were overjoyed when they saw the Lord. You see, Jesus broke the script and he rose from the dead, which punctuated everything he taught, which punctuated all his claims and everything he did. It's true. It's true. And we could go on and on. In fact, the Apostle John, when he thinks about the life of Jesus and all the scripts he broke, I love what he says. The Apostle John says, Jesus did many other things. So many times he broke the script as well. If every one of them were written down, I suppose that even the whole world would not have room for the books that would be written. This is what Jesus Christ did. And the question becomes, why? Why did Jesus continually break the script? Well, I think there's lots of reasons as to why. I think one of the main reasons is because that's how we remember. When you and I break the script in our life, it does something in our minds, and it kind of sears that moment. It captures that moment. It leads to a moment of elevation, which leads to a defining moment. And Jesus knew this message that you and I could have peace with God, and it's simple. It's not based upon what you have or have not done. It's based upon what Jesus Christ has already done for you. He knew the power of the message, and he knew generations from now. He knew today we would sit in this room and to carry this message on, to ensure that it passed on from generation to generation. He continued to break the script. I think another reason why he broke the script is because Jesus Christ loves you. He really does. And as we alluded to earlier, breaking the script is not easy. I mean, if you're going to break the script for somebody, it's because you love them. It's because they matter to you. It's because you care for them. And Jesus Christ did what love required of him. He came into a very broken world, and he lived a perfect life for you and I to have peace with God. And Jesus Christ did what love required of him. He broke the script over and over. And at the end of Jesus' life, he gives us one command. And the one command that summarizes all commands in the Bible is love each other. Just as I have loved you, you should love each other. As a follower of Christ, your number one job, if you only get one thing right as a follower of Christ, it's this: love as Christ loved you. Which means, what does love require of us as a follower of Christ? It requires of us to do what Jesus Christ did. He broke the script. And even if you're here today and you're not a follower of Christ, which I so respect and I love, I mean, I know you love your kids. I know you love your relationships. I know you love your life. I know you love the things that you do. And this would be fair for you as well. What does love require of you as a non-follower of Jesus Christ? Well, what love requires of you as well is to do something different. What love requires of all of us, honestly, if we're honest, is to break the script. So, what does that look like? If you and I were just talking, you were like, okay, I get it. What does this now practically look like for me? Well, I would say this: if we're going to break the script, we first have to understand the script. In other words, if you're going to begin to make a difference, if you're going to begin to kind of, have those peak moments be peakier or create more peak moments in your life, you first have to understand your life, which means the rhythms of your life, the routines of your life. So if I said, hey, what's the script of your marriage? It would be you'd have to think intentionally. Well, here's kind of our routine. I get up, I brush my teeth, I get coffee because I don't function without coffee if you're anything like me, right? And then I, get up, I read a little bit, and I get in my car, go to work. I may kiss my kids and, come home and watch TV, have a beer, go to bed, and repeat. That's what I do. That's kind of my marriage. That's the routines of my marriage. What's the script of your marriage? What's the script of your friendships? When it comes to my friends, man, we hang out all the time and, we get in the car and we go to this house and here's the activities we do. And then what do we do the next weekend? We get in the car, we go to this house and here's what we do. What do we do the next weekend? That's just routines. And if we're ever going to break the script, we've got to understand our lives, understand the routines. And that's true when it comes to your relationship with God. You know, what's the script of that? You know, when it comes to God, I go to church, I serve, maybe I give a little bit, then I go home and do what I want. I go to church, serve, give a little bit, go home and do what I want. That's the script. And as you think about your scripts, because this is so important for us to do, as you think about your routines and your habits, as you think about the rhythms of your life and the way you spend your time, your moral choices, your financial choices, oftentimes we bump into something. And what we bump into is this, is we get stuck. And all of a sudden we're like, man, you know, I feel stuck relationally. I feel stuck financially. I feel stuck morally. I keep crossing this line. God, you told me not to, and I really want to trust you, but I keep doing it. And the very thing I don't want to do, I keep doing it. I'm just stuck. We feel stuck. Sometimes when we begin to kind of understand our life, we feel bored. Like, is this all there is? Is this it? Is there any more fun? Any more adventure? Any more, things like that? Or oftentimes we run into this, is that we feel monotonous. We feel like, hey, it's just like Groundhog's Day over and over. My relationship with my son, my relationship with my kids, I just keep doing the same thing. Or sometimes we feel like it's irrelevant. What's the point anymore? I just feel like giving up. I feel stuck. I don't feel like there's a difference being made here. And I don't have a lot of hope for tomorrow. And see, when you begin to evaluate your life and you begin to think about each part of your life and your time and your moral choices and your money and your relationship with your kids and your relationship with your parents, your relationship with your friends and your work or what you're doing at school, and you begin to bump into these things, if that happens, you're susceptible. You're at the edge of a trap of life. And the trap of life is this, and I love the way Chip Heath discusses this in the book, The Power of Moments. He says, this is a great trap of life. We're all susceptible to this. One day rolls into the next, and a year goes by, and we still haven't had the conversation we always meant to have. Still haven't created that peak moment for our kids. Still haven't seen the northern lights. We walk a flat land that could have been a mountain range. None of us want our life to be defined that way. None of us want to look back on our legacy and just say, yeah, it could have been a mountain range, but it was a flat land. Because I just kept doing the same thing over and over and over. Have you ever felt this? Guys, I'm just telling you, in life, in my marriage with Jill and I, man, I've felt this. I've shared this, multiple times, that we just have felt so stuck at times, and we're like, we want the mountain, kind of peaks, but we just feel like it's so flat. I felt this in my job. I felt this financially. I felt this with my sons. I think we've all kind of bumped into this. And you see, the question then becomes, what do we do? When you bump in and you feel stuck and we're kind of like, I want these mountain things, but I keep seeing the flat land and I don't know what to do. What do we do? And this is the part that's so tricky. This is the part that's just not that pragmatic and easy. It's not formulaic. It's not like, just do this one thing, you'll be fine. And the reason why it's so tricky at this point is because of this statement that Tanya Luna says in her book, Surprise. I love this because I think she captures the tension. And she says, we feel most comfortable when things are certain, but we feel most alive when they're not. Have you ever felt that? Because isn't it true our culture says, hey, work, achieve, do all you can to get that steadiness and certainty and be comfortable. And then you finally get the job and you're bored. Then you finally get the house and the status and the financial freedom and you go, is this all there is? Then you finally get to that relational place. You finally get that set of friends that are cool and everybody goes, ooh, look at them. And you finally get that, amount of likes on. And it's just like, is this all there is? It's a dichotomy that we face, two opposing ideas, two chasms. And we pursue this, comfort, certainty, stability. But it comes at the expense of the adventure, the fun, the spice of life. So what do we do with that? What do we do? Well, this concept or this whole tension, I think is best phrased in this book called Power of the Moments, where Chip Heath, he talks about what to do. And he says, variety, this is so important, is the spice of life. But notice that it does not say variety is the entree of life. Nobody dines on pepper and oregano. A little novelty can go a long way. Learn to recognize your own scripts So important. Play with them, poke at them, disrupt them. Not all the time, just enough to keep spice in life. You see, when we disrupt our scripts of life, when we begin to defy expectations, when we become intentional and begin to understand our routines and rhythms of life, and we begin to break the script, that leads to our memories being the memories we so desire. It leads to a different direction in our life, and it's what love requires of us. So if you and I were just having this conversation, we talked about all this stuff, and you're like, okay, what do I personally do in my life? I would say the first thing you got to do is you've got to understand your life. You've got to understand your routines. You've got to understand the script. And this is going to take work. See, this is where the rubber meets the road, especially if you're a follower of Christ. At this point, you're like, yeah. This is where the meat and potatoes is. This is where the idea is to go, okay, from this point forward, Buck, I'm going to go home. I'm going to think about this. I'm going to write it down. I'm going to begin to understand my routines, my scripts, my rhythms in life. And I'm going to get intentional. And I'm going to discover where I'm stuck, where I feel bored, where I feel like, hey, it's kind of irrelevant. What's the point? And when you find a place, as you think about your life and your marriage and your relationships and your mom and dad and your finances and your relationship with God that you're stuck, when you're stuck in life, it's time to break the script. It's time to do something. And the question becomes, where do you need to break the script? As you think about your relationship with God, honestly, is that the area you need to break the script? I mean, has it gotten to a place to where it's just like, okay, come to church, I serve and go home, do what I want, and it's like, Buck, you talk about this adventure with God. You talk about there's something exciting. I never really feel that. Well, I haven't felt that in a long time. A relationship with God is just that. It's a relationship. And I don't know any relationship that if you're not intentional and if you don't spend time with, an intentional time with, that's going to grow. It's actually going to diminish. And perhaps for you, as you begin to really think about, what does my relationship with God look like? Let me begin to understand my routines with him. Maybe as you think about that, part of breaking the script for you is beginning to pray. Maybe for the first time in your life, going, I'm just going to communicate with God for the first time. I'm going to talk to God and invite him in to these certain areas of my life. Maybe for you, it's beginning to open the Bible and just saying, hey, I'm just going to read until I bump into something for the first time. And it's like what you're reading that morning, what you're reading that afternoon or that evening, it feels like God is preparing you and like spoke to you and prepares you for what you're going to face in the next 24 hours. And all of a sudden you broke the script and the adventure, the spice, if you will, begins to come in. Or maybe it's serving, or maybe it's giving for the very first time. Or maybe in your marriage. Maybe as you think about your relationship in your marriage, you're like, honestly, I think about the routine. Okay, I get up, I brush my teeth, have coffee, go to work, come home, kind of give a little peck on the cheek, watch TV, go to bed, repeat. And maybe in your marriage, maybe it's breaking the script is as simple as just taking a walk. One of my good friends one time said, Buck, one of the greatest things I've done in my marriage is take a simple walk and just ask my wife to tell me about her day. And all I did was listen. Maybe in your marriage, it's planning a spontaneous date. Maybe you haven't taken her on a date in a long time. And maybe it's calling your mother-in-law and saying, hey, can you watch the kids and planning something? And just the entire night is about discovering her or discovering him. Maybe like Jill and I. One of the things when we got stuck in our marriage and I was talking to a friend of mine and I was like, okay, here's what's going on. And okay, here's what I think I should do. And then I kept trying to do that. That didn't work. And here's what I think I should do. Finally, a friend of mine reflected to me and said, Buck, I know you want to move forward in your marriage, but it's interesting to me, not one time have you told me what God has invited you to do. You've told me about all your plans, but you've never invited God into this. What do you think he would say? And I remember thinking, wow, that's just something different. That's something I just simply haven't done. Maybe with your friends. Maybe you continue, you think about your routine with your friends and you keep bumping into things and you're like, I'm so stuck in life. I keep doing the wrong thing. And it seems to be around that specific group of people. I mean, that principle that says friends determine the direction and quality of your life, it's a principle for a reason. Maybe breaking the script looks like, hey, I've got to, love these friends, but I got to find a new set of friends that I'm going to hang out with for you in your life. As you think about your life, honestly, just think about it. Is there any area you feel stuck? Is there any area that you feel a little bit bored? Is there any area that feels just irrelevant, like, what's the point? I've kind of given up on? And perhaps with that specific area, it's time to break the script, to understand the routines, to be intentional, and then to ask the question, what does that look like for me? What does it look like to create an elevated moment? What does it look like to break the script? Because when we do, it's the very thing that leads to those elevated moments. It's the very thing that leads to defining moments. And defining moments are the very thing that leads and shapes our lives and our stories. So where do you need to break the script? Let me pray for us. God, thank you again for today. Thank you for your grace and your love. Thank you that we can have this kind of discussion. And Father, I know you know our hearts. I know you know our routines and our lives. You know where we need to lean in. You know where we're heading. You know if that's going to lead us to a place that we so desire not to be. So Father, would you open our eyes to that? Would you open our eyes to our lives as they really are? And would you give us the courage to do something different and break the script? I trust you with that. In Jesus' name, amen.